Hey there, I'm Magnos and this is the GlucoGauge, a custom-built analog display for showing my current blood glucose at a glance. But before I get into exactly how it works, I feel it's important to explain why I made it in the first place. I've been a type 1 diabetic for a bit over 5 years now, and that comes with constantly having to manage my blood glucose. For anyone unfamiliar, here's a massively oversimplified explanation. The goal is to keep your glucose in a specific range, usually between 70 and 180 milligrams. If you go too high, you take insulin, and if you drop too low, you eat something with sugar. A so-called continuous glucose monitor then handles the actual tracking and sends the numbers straight to my phone. Which brings us back to the question, if I can see the value on my phone, why did I build this? I'm a university student and so I spend most of my time working at my desk. And during that, it's easy to forget to check my BG, especially if that involves me having to pull out and unlock my phone. And I'm not alone in that, as there is already a device on the market called the Sugar Pixel. However, there are a couple of issues I have with it. First, the design. If I'm gonna have something permanently on my desk, I'd want it to look a bit more interesting than a cheap alarm clock from Amazon. And speaking of cheap, I'd rather not pay $130 to a company that is too cheap to hire an actual photographer and instead just photoshops their products into really bad AI images. So, as the saying goes, if you want it done right, you gotta do it yourself. And once again, this is the GlucoGauge. The design is inspired by 70s space-age decor. And apart from the electronics of course, the entire thing is 3D printed with the main body being sanded and painted to achieve this high-gloss look. So here's how it works. The main gauge is used to display your current blood sugar and the little arrow at the top indicates the trend, so if it's falling, rising or staying steady. It gets these values in one of two ways. Either by requesting them directly from the server backend of the sensor manufacturer, or by integrating it to Home Assistant and getting the value from there. Now, you might have noticed the lack of numbers on it, and that's on purpose. This is a secondary display. It's not meant to be my only way of determining my blood glucose. And before I take insulin, for example, I always double check on my phone. I also just think it looks a lot nicer this way, and I don't need the numbers to remember which value is where. And while I'm on the topic of customization, how do I change the settings for this thing? There's no display on it after all, and no inputs to be seen. Well, simple. When first starting up the GlucoGauge, it creates a Wi-Fi hotspot which I can then join using my phone or computer. And from there I can access a web interface allowing me to change the connection settings, calibrate and test the gauge positions, change the speed at which the needle moves, and whatever else I want. Then, once I'm done, I just restart and it starts operating. You might have also noticed the lack of a power cable coming out of it, and that's because it runs on battery. Since it doesn't have to permanently power LEDs and instead just turns some servo motors every couple of minutes, the battery lasts between 3 and 6 months depending on the update frequency. So yeah, that is it. I really like the way it turned out, both in form and function. And so far, it's really helped me in keeping track of my blood sugar. Overall, making it one of my favorite things I've made so far. And speaking of so far, if you've made it so far into this video, I encourage you to think about subscribing, as it's honestly a huge boost for my motivation to know that people are enjoying these little projects of mine. Also, please feel free to give me suggestions for improvements. And if you're a fellow diabetic, let me know what you think about the GlucoGauge. But either way, thank you for watching and have a good day.